We're gonna have our panelists introduce themselves. You could just tell us a little bit about the research that your lab is doing, what type of position you have and how long you've had it. Maybe if you can tell us a little bit about the position that you had before you got this faculty position. And how did you know that a job in academia is what you wanted? Who'll let you go first?
I don't mind going first. Can everyone hear me okay? So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Emil, and like Terry said, I'm a new assistant professor here in the Department of Plant Pathology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I just arrived and started my position and started my lab last September. So I guess that makes it, yeah, almost 8 months now. Time really does fly by. So yeah, in my lab, we study the origins of fungal pathogenesis using a whole variety of omics approaches and different systems working with both plant pathogens and also human pathogens. And the types of questions we're interested in answering are along the lines of, what makes a pathogen? Why are some strains better able to infect some hosts than others? And when do good fungi turn bad? Like when do we actually have the ability to assess and predict when we might see the next pathogenic fungus emerge from a population? And yeah, recently we've been trying to tackle these approaches by studying different kinds of mobile elements in fungal genomes, and specifically a new family of mobile elements called starships. So right now we're really trying to understand the role of these unusual transposons in the evolution of fungal pathogens. And before starting my lab here, I had 2 different postdoc positions, 2 years overseas in Switzerland as a postdoc, and then prior to that, another 2-year postdoc at actually 2 different universities here in the US. The lab moved halfway through, so that was also an interesting, something interesting to experience. So yeah, and then I guess before that, I graduated with my PhD in 2019. So that's kind of tracing it all back. So yeah, with that, I'll pass it along to the next panelist. Not sure if anyone wants to jump in, Tommy or Claire.
I can hop in here. Yeah, so I have a very similar trajectory. My name is Claire Willing. I also started my position as an assistant professor here at the University of Washington in September. So yeah, my lab is about 8 months old now. And our lab really focuses on forest microbiomes and climate change. And so we look at that from a number of different angles. First, looking at how climate change and climate change associated factors impact community structure and community assembly of forest microbiomes. And then we look at how that sort of impacts plant processes in forest systems. So shifts in plant communities associated with shifts in microbial communities. And then we also look at how these microbial communities influence plant resistance and resilience to climate change as well. So kind of the plant stress and then the plant community components are included in our foci. Yeah, so I also have an assistant professor position, and this is an R1 institution. And prior to joining UW, I should mention I'm also in the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences, so I'm not in a strictly like microbial or mycology position, and I applied to some of those and some more broadly. But prior to this, I was a postdoc at Stanford with Kabir Pei. And I was there for 4 years. So I applied for jobs in my 3rd year, and then I deferred my position a year. And I graduated also in 2019 with my PhD from Berkeley. And so I worked with Todd Dawson, who's a plant ecophysiologist, and Tom Bruns, who's a fungal ecologist. Yeah. I think that's pretty much everything there. Pass it to Tommy.
Hey everyone, I am Tommy Jenkinson. I am just finishing my third year as an assistant professor at California State University, East Bay. We're a small public university that's primarily teaching focused. So for folks interested in a primarily teaching position, I guess I'm the representative talking about the specifics of looking for a job at that type of a college. My lab studies amphibian chytrid disease, and we're specifically interested in using population genetics to try and figure out how amphibian chytrid is moving around the world, where it originated and evolved from, and trying to use comparative genomics to understand what makes it such a nasty disease, and to try and shut down transmission routes as it's spreading around the world. Before this, I was a postdoc and an adjunct lecturer for 3 years at UC Berkeley, and then I did a short postdoc, a remote postdoc actually, at UC Davis. And I finished my PhD in 2017 at University of Michigan.
Thank you all. Our first question is, how did you know that you wanted a job in academia? Maybe we can start backwards once.
Cool. So for me, it was, so I had a very specific vision for the job that I wanted and the type of job I wanted. And I specifically knew very early on that I wanted to be at a primarily teaching college. And that was because I had experience going to a primarily teaching college. And so I did my master's at another California State University, which is another small public regional college. For those of you like wondering how you can tell a university is a small public regional is we're usually named like something state university, or we have a cardinal direction in our name, like Southern Oregon University or Eastern Michigan University. Those are small publics that are primarily teaching, mostly undergrad oriented, but we do have a small graduate program. So it was important to me to still be able to be doing research, but I found really early on as a grad TA that I loved classroom teaching. And I was really interested in refining my skills at it. And I was lucky enough to go to a small public regional for my master's degree. And it was in my experience there that I saw that my professors seemed like they had awesome life balance and really, really loved their jobs. And so they were folks who loved teaching and were freaking awesome at it, but they were also doing great research. They were still maintaining a presence in the research community, and they were still PIs of labs. And so like seeing my mentors have that cool balance of teaching, but still being able to conduct research and being a lab PI was super appealing to me.
Awesome. So I'm kind of the opposite end of that, I guess. I don't think I had that sort of clarity that this was something that I wanted to do. I'd never met anyone with a PhD before I went to college, so that wasn't some sort of career path I had really envisioned for myself. And when I got to college, that's kind of when I started like getting exposure to the idea of going to grad school. And then I went to college at a small liberal arts school. And so I think that was what I was familiar with. And so initially in grad school, I was like, oh, I think maybe that would be comfortable. Like I could see myself at a small liberal arts school. And then sort of through my journey, it was kind of a lot of different exposure points, and then kind of just trying out and seeing what felt natural for me. And I think for me, I really love working with with graduate students and like designing research projects and getting to really do some of the like hands-on mentoring at sort of that stage of the career. And so that was something that as I was kind of thinking about jobs and where I wanted to go, I didn't want to be only doing research. I like teaching too, but I think the research that I wanted to be doing and the mentoring I wanted to be doing was kind of at that like graduate student postdoc level. And I think that was largely informed by my postdoc experience as well.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Claire and Tommy. Yeah, I guess I also kind of fell into academia. What was the main motivator for me was trying to just find a way to keep studying fungi, to be honest. Um, the first job I got out of high school was actually working at this store called the Myco Boutique, which for those of you who might not have heard about it before, but it's a store that's like specializes in selling all kinds of different like mushroom themed things, like everything from, mushroom themed napkins to like resources to grow your own mushrooms and different types of foraging equipment. So before I got the job there, I really knew nothing about fungi. Hadn't had any opportunities to study them in school. But yeah, once I started paying more attention to them, I realized I just wanted to keep learning about them. And so that's what kind of set me initially down the academic route, because I think it's one of the most obvious ways you can build a career studying fungi. And yeah, I would say from there, just one thing led to the other, and applied for undergrad in microbiology because that was the closest I could get to studying fungi at that time. And from there, applied to a PhD program because it seemed like it would be a really good fit. And once I was there, yeah, I think that's when I just realized that this would be the right path for me. I really enjoy doing research. I enjoy learning new things, and I enjoy working with fungi. So yeah, I think it was probably around that time while I was doing my PhD. I was like, yeah, this seems pretty good. Like I would want to keep doing this as long as I can. So yeah.
Sure. Now, what are things or factors that should be considered when deciding to apply for a job in academia? And I think Tommy touched on this a little bit, but what helped you decide on which type of institution that you wanted to apply to? Maybe we can start with Claire this time.
Sure. Yeah, so I think I kind of spoke to this a little bit already, but I think for me, I had been at both public and private institutions through my training experience. And so I think for me, I really wanted to be at a public institution. And that's because that's generally the population of people that I was wanting to serve more. And then I think with respect to, for instance, Tommy and I are both at public institutions. I have a primarily like graduate student focus in my research as opposed to kind of master's student and then largely undergrad populations. And so I think for me, it was more related to the types and like duration of projects I was wanting to do in my research. And so I think, for master's projects, that's usually about 2 years. And so I'm training, PhD students largely. And so that's kind of a different relationship that you build with students. And that's kind of, both are very rewarding in different ways. And so you're just kind of picking between two awesome options in that sense. But for me, I think that that sort of level of teaching and mentoring was kind of what I was wanting.
Yeah, I would say that really resonates with me as well. And yeah, just in thinking about where I wanted to apply when I was going out on the job market, just realizing, yeah, asking myself that first question, like, yeah, what type of science do I want to be doing? and trying to find a good match in terms of the institution and the culture of the institution to yeah, what I wanted to be spending my time doing.
Yeah, I think really kind of having an idea of what type of school you want to be working at, and knowing a little bit about the difference. So a large research intensive versus something of a mix versus, and we touched on small liberal arts colleges, which would be like they all present really different job types. And so you kind of got to know what you would be happy and most fulfilled with a little bit. I think also just some practical things that need to come up are how much time you are willing to spend on the job market, and if there are geographic considerations for you and your family that present constraints, because all of those will bring in challenges to your job search. So kind of having those, I think, having an internal conversation with yourself, but also a conversation with your family members and loved ones about like the challenging nature that the job search process will entail, the uncertainty and the difficulty it's going to have on your relationships, and being like honest and open with folks you care about that whole approach, I think is something that you want to be thinking about and talking about early.
And I'll just chip in. The other thing I forgot to mention is obviously teaching is an important part of this position as well. But I will say that I think
I think you froze, Claire.
Sorry about that. I think I froze, but I was just saying I do think it's an important consideration that the emphasis, at least pre-tenure in my position, is definitely on research and much less on teaching. So if that's, I still care about teaching, but I think that's another consideration for folks, is that if that's what you want to be the kind of primary focus, and R1 is going to like de-emphasize the teaching a lot compared to another type of institution.
Are really good points. Now, most applications will vary depending on institutions and departments, but they all usually have the same kind of documents that you have to turn in: CV, personal letter, teaching statement, diversity statement. What tips do you have? Maybe things that you wish you had known as you were preparing your documents. What should we be doing or putting into those? And how far in advance should we prepare those? And I'll do one time.
I can start this round. I think the best piece of advice I got was start early. And I was encouraged. I had a really awesome mentor who encouraged me to put together my job packet before I defended my PhD. And so that's like, seems ridiculously early, but it turned out to be awesome advice, because those materials take a couple of rounds of refinement at least to like get down. And so the earlier you can get them going, and the earlier you can have like as many people as you can check them out and give you feedback, the better off you're going to be, and like the smoother the road is going to be for prepping those materials.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, my PhD supervisor also encouraged me to do the same, and you know, I put together like an application that I sent out I think before graduating, and definitely had no chance of ever getting it, but it was a really good exercise in just trying to hustle and really think about how to present your research, and yeah, and really think about what is meaningful for you and what you would be excited to do in terms of it, in terms of establishing a research program, if that's what you want to do, or establishing a teaching program, if that's what you want to do. Yeah, I would say the one definitely, yeah, multiple rounds of edits that really resonates with me. I think my whole application went through like 3 or 4 like major rehauls as I played around with different ways of like pitching my research, or played around with different like ways of conceptualizing conceptualizing my research program. I would say one of the most helpful things was getting examples documents from peers, or from like recently appointed professors from like the types of institutions that I wanted to be at, and just like using those as like a template that I could like just at least get like a structure from, or just trying to get a sense for like how people talk about their research, what level of detail is like too much, what level of detail is it's just right. So yeah, I would say just ask around your network of peers or your mentorship networks, see if you can get any application materials. And yeah, I would certainly be happy to share my application materials. And just feel free to send me an email afterwards. Yeah, and yeah, in terms of how far in advance should they be prepared? I think I work pretty well with like deadlines. So yeah, I would say just find a job that you could see yourself applying for, and just use that as kind of like a motivator for putting together the package. And the sooner you do that, yeah, I think you'll be yeah, well off down the road, like Tommy was saying.
I agree with everything that's already been said. I did not prepare my materials super far in advance, so I started preparing materials probably in like early July, and then put in my first application, I think in probably like October, I want to say, and then through December was kind of like when all of the job ads were getting posted, at least in the round that I was in. And I definitely relied heavily on colleagues' materials. And so from, people that are mycologists all the way through people that are wildlife biologists. And those were really helpful to get a sense of like the types of things that really work, and how to really pitch your work. And because I work sort of at this interface between plants and fungi, I actually ended up writing 2 different statements. So I have my like microbial focused one, and then I have my more like plant focused one. And so giving yourself time to like think about the types of jobs. You could even look at like the past cycles job ads or whatever, and like see which jobs would be appealing to you, and then think a little bit about how to tailor those statements to those types of jobs. But I think that's, for me, a really key part is like really tailoring your statements to the specific job ad and to the specific institution, because I think that's really, really important in making it further in the process.
Yeah, along those lines of tailoring your application, if there is a particular job that you're really interested in applying for, I would really recommend reaching out to the chair of the search committee and just asking, maybe if you could just meet for 30 minutes, you have some questions that you'd like to ask them about the job, about the institution. I did that for a couple of interviews, or a couple of applications that I was really invested in. And that really helped kind of get the inside scoop as to like, okay, they're saying this in the job ad, but what's in between the lines? What are they really looking for? What's the expectations of this position? You can maybe get also a bit of a temperature check on the department and on the university as well, just by asking a couple of questions in advance. So yeah, I would recommend reaching out and seeing if they have time to speak with you.
Sure. Yeah. All awesome advice. I was gonna echo on Claire's advice of having a few different a few different slightly packets with slight variations on them to specific calls. And so I had extreme geographic restrictions that I was working with. So I was actually on the job market for 4 years, which gave me a lot of time to refine my materials. By the end, I had a packet which was like for an evolution job. I had a packet for an ecology job. I had a packet for a microbiology job. And then depending on like what the university was calling for, I would send in like one or the other of those. The other thing I just thought of that can be like uh, a total warp zone for success for job application materials. And I didn't do this. This is hearing from other folks. But if you have the opportunity to serve on a faculty search committee, that is like having served on search committees now, that's going to be the thing that like shows you examples of awesome application materials and interview skills. So I've heard from folks that have like been the grad student rep on a search committee that they learned a ton from that experience.
Yeah, I'll just echo Tommy on that. I think I've learned so much being on this side of hiring, and there are things I was completely unaware of that I kind of got lucky with, I guess. But my friends that did serve on search committees, I think were really, really well prepared for the job market. And I also saw a question in the chat about how like the length of materials. It varies pretty widely, I would say, by position. So I don't think it's something that I can probably answer. But I would say generally institutions were asking for an R1, like up to a 3-page statement, and then down to, I think my shortest one was probably like 800 words or 1,000 words or something. It was like really, really short. And they had you kind of like break it up into different pieces. So there's a lot of tailoring that goes into it, but I think if you just start with maybe like 2 to 3-page statements, you can kind of cut them down from there. That's probably the best advice I can give on that front.
Now, taking into account all your answers, how time consuming is the application process? And how are you able to balance doing that while at the same time holding the job that you had before getting your new position?
There's this joke that when you're a postdoc on the job market, you have 2 full-time jobs. But
it's not so much a joke as
not so much a joke. Yeah. It's like it is really like it sucks, but your free time kind of goes towards applying. I don't know if other folks' experiences were different.
I had a postdoc mentor that I think was pretty understanding that like a huge part of the training experience is applying for jobs, be it academic or non-academic. And so my research definitely took a hit during that time. I think probably most of ours do, even if you're working, crazy hours. I would say I really spent like, it's hard to like think back realistically because I think we skew our memories a lot on that, but I think I was probably spending a few weeks at a time like really, really emphasizing that and then kind of coming back to it. So I was like kind of going back and forth between being really, really research focused and then going back to my materials and refining them based on a new position that came up, because the positions aren't all posted like all at once. And so I saw like one I was excited about early on. And so I was like, okay, move quickly, like get that stuff together. And then it was kind of a lull for a little while. And then a couple others came up. And so I was refining when those came up. And so I think it's something that's a little bit of like a hurry up and wait kind of situation where you have to kind of see what's available in the year that you're applying or the years that you're applying to.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add beyond that. Only to say that, yeah, you really have to find a way of prioritizing it. if it really is for like a job that you really want, because this isn't an opportunity that's going to come around again. So I know I certainly, you know, prioritize the job applications at the expense of my research. I also had an understanding supervisor at the time. And yeah, I would say that it really is a struggle. And it can be challenging at times if you really do want to move your research forward at the same time. But ultimately, yeah, you just have to find a way of prioritizing the application if it really is for a job that you want. And that's a really good way to actually justify putting in the work, because it is a once in a lifetime opportunity.
I think those are great points, that a good postdoc mentor knows that this is just part of the gig, right? And they themselves, you know, have been there too. And so like part of they should be taking into account that part of your time is just going to necessarily have to go to job applications.
So definitely worth having a discussion with your supervisor directly about it, and just being upfront about how you're spending your time.
And also, I think, you know, as I have just put together all my promotion materials and things like that for my first year, it only benefits your supervisor if you're landing an academic job. And so I think it's an important point for you. I definitely struggled with a lot of guilt, of like, oh, I'm not doing enough on my apps and I'm not doing enough in my research, and, you know, the whole process thereof. But I think it's a good reminder that it also is a benefit to them and like their research program. So they can list like, oh, the person that was hired on XYZ grant or that I've trained is now faculty. So don't feel super guilty. It's part of the gig.
Now, I know there are certain applications processes where they'll have like a Zoom interview before in-person interviews. Could you talk about like the different types of questions that might be asked, that like a Zoom versus the in-person? And if there were how can you like prepare for those questions? And did you have any that were like challenging or that you were surprised that you were asked?
I can start this one. Yeah, so I did have a Zoom interview ahead of time for this position that I'm currently at. And I think I prepared by, there are a list of questions online that my postdoc advisor had sent to me. And I can probably search as somebody else is talking for the link to that. It was extraordinarily extensive. I did not have the time to prep an answer to all of them, but I tried to just focus on groups and have like preset answers. I don't think I got any questions out of left field, really. They were all kind of things that I'd already kind of prepared for. But I would think a little bit about how you would fit, like really envisioning yourself at that institution. Because I think that's what can really sell a search committee on you, is like seeing you as their colleague. So, for example, I was doing research in California. I'm now in Washington State. And so in the conversations we've had as a faculty hiring people, that comes up as like, oh, has this person really thought about what a research program would look like in Washington, versus another type of ecosystem, environment, et cetera, that they work in. So as an ecologist, that's something that is really important, is like, how do you envision your research program fitting into this institution and this department specifically? And I'll search for those questions now.
Yeah, and one really great way to do that and to actually show your interest in a particular department is to really prepare questions to ask the search committee. So they're really looking for people who have done their homework, who have actually thought about what it would mean having a job at a particular place. So yeah, I would say one way to signal your interest is really to ask questions, you know, and yeah, I would say questions that are specific to the particular place. Yeah, I also didn't really have like too many questions that were out of left field. I think yeah, prior to the Zoom interviews, which I had for 2 of the interviews that I had, I just really just tried from like looking at my CV and literally just trying to remember like what I've done and just have that be at the forefront of my memory so I could, you know, draw upon like different examples and make sure I didn't forget anything, or maybe even just have like your CV or some short notes like up on the side of the screen, just so, because sometimes you can get flustered, yeah, during an interview, and it can be helpful just to like look at it and just kickstart your memory. But yeah, I would say get ready to talk about your vision for your research. Get ready to talk about your experiences teaching, or at least your teaching philosophy, what types of courses you would want to teach, your experience mentoring, and also like challenges and successes you've had doing research, mentoring, teaching. Yeah, I would say really try and try and frame the answers to these questions in terms of like stories and examples that the search committee can relate to. Sometimes it can be really easy to talk in like broad stroke generalizations, but I think many times what people are looking for are specifics, and they really do want you to speak from your own experience. So yeah, I would say being specific can really pay off.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a standard, like folks were saying, kind of a standard stock of questions in the phone/Zoom interview. They're going to be things like, tell us about your research. But they're actually looking at how well you can communicate your research, right? How well you can tell a story, like Neil said. How will you fit in the department is a huge one. Like, what will be your contribution? What's that going to look like? How are you going to be a colleague? For public universities, especially where I'm at in California, they will likely ask you what you will do to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. So depending on your institution, you will want to have thought that question out and be able to have a conversation about that. And then we actually have a curveball question that I was given at my college. So we're a teaching institution. Our tenure materials specifically state that research is, or teaching is, our primary axis of evaluation. And so teaching comes above and before everything else in our evaluation for tenure. And our teaching loads are high. And so the like curveball question that our institution gives to job candidates is they tell the candidate, our assistant professor teaching loads are a 3-3. How do you feel about that? And if you flinch, that is cause for concern. So depending on your institution, they're going to like, you know, how are you going to fit in is a big one. And for us, it's like, how do you fit in as an educator, as a teacher? Are you stoked about it? Or are you going to, and we've had people fail in our institution because they were unhappy with the teaching load. Like they hated it. They hated teaching that much. And it set up a situation where they were unhappy, the students were unhappy, the institution's unhappy. And so like for our school, we kind of try to get a handle and like a little bit of a filter on that in the interview process.
There's a question in the chat maybe before we move on to our next question, but they're asking about, do you have any advice for talking with people that are not in the search committee itself? So like someone like a dean or other positions with the university. Does any of you have some suggestions?
Yeah.
Do you want to start, Tommy?
Sure. Yes. I think the best piece of advice I got and if you're talking to the dean, you're probably at the point of like an on-campus interview. And if you're talking to like other faculty members outside of the search committee, you're probably at the point of an on-campus interview. The best piece of advice I got for at that stage is to have fun, like genuinely try to have a fun conversation. Like they're looking for and trying to assess you as a potential colleague. And so I think like, yeah, know your stuff, have done your research about the institution and how and what you'll bring. But I think above all, like be a collegial, like fun person to talk to and just have like genuinely try to enjoy it and have a fun conversation. For me was like the best piece of advice I got.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of that. I think typically you're not going to meet with the dean until an on-campus interview. I did meet with the dean for my interview, among other different sorts of positions. And I don't think the dean actually really heavily weighs in on the search. I think largely it's actually informational for you to see who your boss might be. And I think for me, I actually had a really great conversation with the dean. She's newer and had some really great ideas and visions for kind of where the College of the Environment is headed. And so I basically started out the conversation by just asking her what she was excited about at the institution and what sort of next few projects of hers were kind of the exciting ones on her horizons. And that kind of started the conversation out on a good foot. But I wouldn't be too intimidated by those conversations so much as like, you know, just really getting the opportunity to chat with somebody who's in sort of the positions that determine a lot of the ways that things run at your institution.
Yeah, that pretty much captures my experiences talking with the deans during the interviews. Yeah, it really is an opportunity for you to figure out where the university is going. And so asking about like, you know, what are some of the like big initiatives that are going to be taking place over the next, you know, 5 to 10 years? What's the university's plan for yeah, for like XYZ, right? Whatever you're interested in, right? If you're interested in sustainability or doing research on climate change, you can kind of ask like, what's their plan for that? Are there any major initiatives that are going to be happening? If you're interested in AI, you know, you could ask like, what are the university's plans to compete at like a, you know, at a global scale or whatever scale, you know, for those types of initiatives. And so that can really also get you into conversations about like what type of funding's available in the case of a primarily research institution, what type of funding's available at the university level to like support ideas or like seed projects that professors have to kind of like generate preliminary data for a larger project. You know, what type of support is there for putting in different types of grants at like the college level, university level, department level. Yeah, it's really an opportunity for you to figure out a bit of like the nuts and bolts of what's going on. I guess kind of like behind the scenes once you show up, and sometimes that's really helpful to know. You know, like does the college, you know, provide you with like a great support team that will help you put together the grants, and you don't have to worry about any of the extra like paperwork or financials, or is that really something that you're going to have to be doing on your own? That could be particularly useful to know if you're trying to weigh your decision between a couple of different institutions. Yeah.
I'll share one of the best what questions do you have for us questions that I was keyed in on that really served me well. And that was something along the lines of what are you most excited for this new professor to bring? Because that opens up like, you just get an interesting, it one shows that you're invested in like the position itself and the institution, but it also opens up so many avenues for like directions for conversations. And so like I use that question liberally in all of my interviews, like from phone to on campus. And the cool thing about it is like, it gives you an opportunity to personalize your pitch a little bit. So like if you're on a Zoom interview and the committee asks, do you have any questions for us? That question, might bring up something like, well, we're really interested in a professor who is going to expose students to authentic field research. Then you can be like, well, it just so happens that I've got some plans for this, this, and that. So that was like that was like always in my back pocket and really served me well in my interviews.
And I used that too. It was great. And it was really helpful for like meeting with students, with other faculty, basically anyone, because it really helps you direct the conversation a little bit versus this.
Okay. While Claire comes back, maybe we can start on the next question. Oh, no, she did.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi is a little finicky today. Part of being at a public institution. Yeah, I was just saying it really was helpful in directing the conversation because there's just so many things you can talk about. It kind of becomes amorphous. And so like having a little bit more specific of a conversation, I think can be really useful versus these like really broad brushstrokes that don't really get you to the places you want to be.
It's fascinating. Everybody has like a slightly different answer for that one. Like it really does open up the conversation and personalize it.
Now, when candidates are asked for in-person interviews, they're usually asked to prepare a research seminar, in chalk talk, or a teaching seminar. I think some of the people in chat are starting to ask those questions. So do you have suggestions for how to prepare these presentations? Good things to be included in those, and just like the overall interview process. I think there's also a question in the chat if you had an open job talk in a closed job talk during your interview. So maybe you can combine answers to all of those.
I can start this one off with, for job talks specifically, my advice is to practice giving talks. And so like as a postdoc, reach out to institutions around you, ask if they are looking for guest speakers for their seminar. Ask your friends if they're putting together a seminar or if they know who's putting together a seminar in like the bio department, if they're looking for speakers, like put your name out there as a postdoc as a possible seminar speaker. And that way you get a ton of practice doing like, they're kind of like mini campus visits and you get to give a talk and refine your talk, which also like for me took many rounds of revision till I felt like it was like perfected. I also think teaching a lot, like having a lot of teaching experience really in just like my academic career, my teaching helps me give good research presentations and helps with that communication. So like, I don't know if that's going to apply to everybody, but that really helped me.
Yeah, I guess kind of the same as the advice for putting together your application package. It can also really help to see examples of job talks. So, there are job searches going on at universities all the time. It can sometimes be difficult to hear about them. So it's definitely worth asking around, maybe someone in like administration of various departments and just see if you can go to a couple of job talks. That can also really just give you a sense of like what the expectations are for a job talk. And yeah, again, also just like asking around like for people's slide decks and seeing some examples of like, okay, like what's the overall structure here? Like how much time are you spending? How are you talking about your science? Those types of things. I found those were really helpful as well. And then yeah, like Tommy said, I can't emphasize enough just practicing giving the talk. I mean, you really need it to sound very natural, and it should be natural. Just like how you're talking about yourself and how you're talking about your science. So yeah, the more practice you get to actually get it to the point where you can just talk about what you want to do and just really show your passion for your research or for your teaching, that's really where you want to end up.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, I would also say to like look back at your materials that you submitted and the job application. So you're going to want to kind of make sure you're tailoring. I'm sure everyone has given some form of research talk at this stage. So you're probably going to be adapting your dissertation defense or another talk that you've had. And so thinking a little bit about how to kind of use those materials you've already prepared, at least for the first parts of the talk, or depending on how you order it, everyone does differently, but using those and then tailoring them again into this sort of job format framework. For me, I had a teaching demonstration. So I had like a separate teaching talk where I talked a bit about my teaching philosophy and things like that. So my research talk, I really focused on like my sort of like thesis of my research. So the things I've done and the things I'm going to do, as well as my approach to diversity, equity, inclusion, and mentorship. So I included those in there and said exactly how I would like do these things at UW. So I think that that was really helpful too, in kind of making sure I was giving a good picture of like who I was going to be at this institution.
But I have one more like piece of advice for the job talk is that in addition to presenting the research that you've done, you should devote like a good chunk to what's going to happen in the future. So like real concrete specifics so that the audience can get a feel for, oh, that's what so-and-so's lab is going to look like when they come here. These are the types of studies they're going to do. These are the types of new experiments they're going to perform or new field work that they're going to do. So like what's going to happen when you arrive at the institution, I think should definitely be like a significant chunk of the job talk.
Yeah, and I would also suggest giving your job talk to people who are like not in that field at all, or not in your field at all, maybe not even like scientists, because you really like, I think you're really striving for um, you're striving for your talk to be like easily understood by anyone. At the same time, like, you know, making clear that you're doing like really cutting edge stuff, but you really, you're going to be speaking to a very diverse audience, with diverse interests and coming with, you know, different backgrounds. And so you really want what you say to resonate with people. Yeah, kind of irregardless of where they're coming from. So I found giving my talk to like just like friends who aren't in the sciences to be really, really helpful, because, you know, they could just turn around and say, well, you totally lost me when you were talking about, you know, in this part of the talk, because I really just couldn't follow the thread. And that's a really good reality check, in terms of like, yeah, looking for those like little things that are going to prevent people from like just like understanding who you are and what type of like research you're proposing.
So I think we tend to focus a lot in how we're being perceived when we go to these interviews. But if we turn it around, what are things that we should be evaluating in the departments that we're visiting, the institutions? What are that maybe are not so obvious that we should be more careful about?
Y'all mind if I get this started? That's a great question. I think I would try to assess how happy the junior faculty are. And they'll tell you, like, in like the one-on-ones, if you get to the stage of an on-campus interview, you're gonna have like one-on-one meetings with a bunch of different faculty members. Like, if folks are unhappy, they're going to be vocal about it in those interviews. They're like, a lot of junior faculty aren't shy about telling you like what the problems are. And I think really, like for me, I was like trying to gauge, are people happy working here? Or does it seem like they hate their job? You know, that like talking to a few different junior faculty members one-on-one, like that stuff comes out, you know, and it can be like if you're paying attention for it, you can really tease out those patterns, like you know, the same like issue comes up over and over again as a drag, that like when you ask people, how do you like working here, or what's your boss like?
Yeah, I would say asking those questions to grad students is also super, super helpful because, yeah, I would say one of the best indicators of the department's health is, you know, how faculty and students relate to each other. And so you really want to be in a place where, where, you know, things are going really well in terms of faculty student relations. So yeah, grad students also are not going to be afraid to tell you if something isn't going well, or if there are particular tensions in the department. So yeah, I would say really spend some time interacting with students, and usually if you have an on-campus visit, you will meet with a group of students at once. I don't think you'll necessarily have one-on-one meetings, but definitely like after that big group meeting, see if a couple of them would be willing to either like chat with you or correspond by email, and you can maybe ask some more pointed questions to get their opinions.
Yeah, and in addition to that, we have a group of junior faculty here. We call ourselves the modern faculty. And so we all have a WhatsApp group, and you know, there are faculty that are at different stages and from different kind of systems of belief about lots of things. And so I think that I have relationships with like faculty at all stages that are really, really awesome. But that sort of like group of the kind of pre-tenure, just got tenure group for us, at least in my department, is really tight. And so like they're the people I kind of rely on. So if you have a great group of people at that kind of stage, those are going to be most of your peer group in terms of like colleagues. And so I think that's really important for me and like my surviving the pre-tenure life here.
Yeah, I think that was an awesome one, Claire. Like, do these people look like people you'd want to like interact with and like hang out with, right? Like, and be each other's support network going into however long in the future you hold this job.
And even just asking about those types of networks too, right? Like, do like, you know, assistant professors have any like groups that or do they meet, or are there any interactions that are happening? Like trying to suss out the culture in the department, you know, at all the different levels, I guess, is important. And just, yeah, figuring out if people are, if the faculty ever get together outside of, you know, faculty meetings, right? Or you know, what are expectations for attending seminar, and are like seminars well attended, for example, by faculty and by students, and are there any departmental events and that kind of things. Yeah, making sure that like it's a healthy community, I guess, and a respectful community. Those were important things for me, and so I think a lot of the questions I ended up asking faculty and students were kind of geared towards trying to figure that out.
The last thing I'll say is there a lot of hiring is happening right now, and so departments are changing quite quickly, I think, across at least the US, if not other institutions. I don't know as much for like other countries, but I know in the US, like this is definitely a thing. So I was hired in a cohort, and so there are 3 of us hired at the same time. We just hired another person. We have a few more hires coming in, and so reminding yourself that the faculty are also going to shift a lot, and like you can have a say in how that goes to some extent or not too. So yeah.
Thank you all for sharing that. I think I had a few more questions, but in the interest of time, we're gonna open up the floor for additional questions from the attendees. I know we have a couple in the chat that we can go through, but if people have other questions that they'd like to ask, feel free to like raise your hand. You could ask the question yourself, or you can put it into the chat. Okay, we'll go through the chat ones first. This one that says, just out of curiosity, how many rejections and how many times you got accepted, but opted out of it, if you feel comfortable sharing
I can share. I got really lucky. I think I applied to 5 or 6 jobs and got one offer, and that was where I wanted to be, which is here. I don't think that's super typical, but it does happen, right? And so I think a lot of that is like I really tailored things. And I think once you're kind of in that pool of competitive candidates, it's kind of like a flip of the coin, right? And so I think the flip of the coin landed in my favor, but it does happen that you don't have to go through tons of rounds necessarily too.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I think over I guess 3 rounds of job applications. I ended up putting in 10 or so applications and heard back from 2. And maybe this touches on some other questions in the chat, but I really found that it was the applications that I spent the most time on that I actually got interviews for. A lot of the times, you're looking at job applications, you're like, oh yeah, maybe I could fit into this. Like that never worked out for me. So yeah, and I know there are a lot of different philosophies on this of like, how many should you apply for? But in my experience, really just putting in the effort and spending the time to really tailor an application paid off it sounds like maybe in Claire's case as well.
Yeah, I was in I had a bunch of friends at the postdoc stage who were on the job market, and there were like wildly different strategies. And I had friends that would like send out tons of applications without a lot of customization, without a lot of tailoring, and they were successful. And then I had friends, and I was more in this category of sending out very few applications, but really tailoring them very strategically. And so because of my family situation, I was restricted to where I could live and where I could move. So by necessity, I just couldn't submit as many applications. And so like the number of applications I submitted was quite small over my 4 years on the job market. And the most success I had was like kind of like a meal when I really like tailored that application very specifically to an institution that I knew and had done a lot of background on.
The next question says, are there non-obvious skills built or activities participated in early on in your PhD programs that you consider particularly helpful during this process?
I think for me, I don't know, it's like a bit of a soft skill, I guess, but I was in a really interdisciplinary department in my PhD. And so like learning how to talk about my research with people that do really different types of stuff, I think actually has really benefited me throughout my career. So when you're interviewing with a search committee, depending on the department, you'll probably have people again with pretty drastically different expertise than what you do. And so being comfortable explaining it in like a way that's not didactic or like condescending, I think is really important. And so that's one that I kind of have practiced throughout my career, starting with being in a pretty diverse cohort of people.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I would also add, if you have opportunities to go to conferences in your field, it's always just like really helpful to just meet people and to start building a network as early as you can. That can help, from everything from like hearing about a job, you know, just as it's put up and not, like 2 weeks from the deadline, to just like actually having a friendly face to wherever you might eventually visit, and just like having somewhere there, having a contact there, that you can rely on and ask questions of, and kind of count on for some help. So yeah, I don't necessarily know if it's not obvious or not, but yeah, I would really put in the effort to spend time getting to know people at conferences and going to like the social events, or going around to posters and introducing yourself, asking questions after talks, and yeah, in the case of the MSA, going on the 4As and that kind of stuff. So
Gosh, I almost just want to say your whole PhD like lens. It's that experience of the time to distill your research story and to be able to tell it as a story, um, and making personal connections, being able to explain your research, that may be very that could be like at a very granular level in practice, but in a way that um, someone not necessarily in your field can grasp it and can walk away and be like, in one sentence, here's the cool thing that this person does. I think like your whole experience as a PhD student kind of leads up to that point, and it takes time to develop those skills.
The next question is, did you have any particular strategies that you like for hunting down job ads?
I don't think I liked them, but I think the Eco Jobs board is kind of the place, and then also Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. But really, the Eco Jobs board has pretty much everything on it, for at least in the ecology evolution realm. I don't know for if you have a slightly different focus.
yeah,
For me,
those were the
yeah,
exact.
for me and my whole community on the job market, it was the Eco job board. For folks unfamiliar with that, maybe we could dig up this year's and like throw it in the chat. It is a listing of like broadly all of the ecology, evolutionarily, organismally focused biology jobs, like very broad, that are advertising tenure track and lecturer positions that year. Um, it's all in one space. I feel like if you work on MSA type stuff, that's your go-to, that's your go-to stop for looking for academic jobs. And the cool thing about that board is, I mean, cool, stressful, anxiety inducing, whatever, is that the community can provide notes. So like the community, through the community, you can kind of like get a feel for like how many people applied, if they've made invitations for phone interviews yet, how many people got on-campus interviews, um, if anything's like weird or red flaggy about the job or institution, the community members will also chime in. So there's a lot of like really just practical information on the EcoEvo job board.
The next question says, how did you navigate negotiations around salary startup?
Those are really hard. I don't think I'd ever negotiated for a position really before. And so this was my first time doing it in a relatively high stakes way of doing it. The advice that I got was to think about my future students and that I was negotiating for their success too. So it's like you're negotiating, of course, for your own research program, but really like the resources are going to be supporting your mentees. And so I think for me, that's what enabled me to kind of switch from like, this isn't like a selfish thing of me just wanting all the things. These are the things that like me and my trainees need to become successful. And I asked for from people that are in MSA, for example, if they would be willing to chat about their startup packages and what they looked like and the things that they pushed for and not. So I think having conversations with like former lab mates and other people in the community, especially that are at a similar institution to you and a similar geographic location, because all of those things factor into how much money is needed to support your lab and what's realistic.
Yeah, I actually went through 2 job negotiations, and ended up I because of my family situation, I had to actually turn one down because I wasn't able to ultimately move to the location that the job was at. So I like learned a lot from those 2 experiences. I think the first like main thing I learned is that the chair is your friend here in the negotiation. The chair wants you to get as much as possible. The chair wants to get as much as possible because they've already committed that they want you in the job role. So the chair is actually like, I don't think people talk about this enough. The chair is a huge resource to help you in your negotiation. They can like give you the inside details on like how far you can push your ask for startup, how far or whether you can push your ask for salary. At a lot of public institutions, salary is going to be very difficult to negotiate because they're publicly set. So for a lot of like public schools, salary range isn't really going to move. Private institutions, I've heard like there's a little more wiggle room, but startup is where you really have some leverage for negotiation, and like talking to your chair and kind of having them they'll give you like the various chairs I work with, they would tell me, like what other people got. They know the dean, they'd be like, the dean would be amenable to something like this, or like, no, the dean's shot that down a bunch of times in the past. Like they're really on your side there at that point in the job search process. And I also got a ton of startup. You need to provide a detailed startup proposal, and I got a ton of examples from colleagues, which are super helpful.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point, Tommy. The chair really is your friend and is on your side. So yeah, kind of view them as a partner in the negotiation that's really happening between the chair and the dean of the college usually. Yeah, I would say along the lines of, yeah, a lot of places ask for a document. Maybe it's an equipment list if you're going to be setting up a lab, or some other document justifying the costs of the startup. I would say really be prepared to justify why you're asking for the money. And yeah, think of some really good reasons why you might like a postdoc for 2 years, or why you might need like a lab assistant, or why you might need like extra money to renovate the lab, for example. So really have a strong sense of like where you're going to be like where your lab is going to be, what your office is going to look like, what the state of those rooms is, how much equipment you're inheriting. So yeah, I would say it would be really helpful to know kind of like, yeah, what you might need to spend money on, and then yeah, justify asking for it.
And ask for what you need, because it's like Claire said, it's you and your students' success in the end, to make sure you have what you need for your research in your lab.
And unfortunately, I'm gonna have to sign out because one of my grad students just defended, so we're gonna need to do a little celebration. But yeah, so I will. Yeah, if anyone has questions, you're welcome to email me. And thanks for putting this together, Terry.
Of course, thank you for being here, making the time to. I was gonna say, to wrap up, I was gonna ask if you had, in retrospective, if there is anything that you would have done differently or that you wish you had known during your application process. Or a last tip that you could share.
I might just say that you want to go in knowing that it is, at least for me, it was an emotionally taxing process. It's hard, like psychologically, emotionally, to not know or to not have certainty for what's coming up in the future. And so I would say, like, have good outlets for your own emotional and mental health, whether that's strong relationships, a strong social support group, things that you can do to take your mind off of like the grind of the job search, healthy outlets to help make sure that you're emotionally, psychologically resilient to just this really weird process of like looking for a faculty job.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. The days that I spent interviewing were some of the hardest and most challenging days that I've ever had to experience professionally. I mean, you literally have to be on and enthusiastic from like 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and you're usually just talking the whole time. And that was certainly not something that I'd ever been used to. And so afterwards, I was just completely exhausted. And yeah, I think just people had told me that it was going to be tough, but I guess just like knowing that it really was going to be so challenging, that would have been really good to like know and prepare for it in advance, just in terms of how are you going to take care of yourself in like the 2 hours or maybe 1 hour that you have after you come home from dinner on the first night and before you have to get up the next day, right? The best piece of advice I got was that like don't bother spending any time like reviewing talks for the next day, just like veg out, and so I just literally watched TV and just was completely zoned out. And I think it's really easy to feel like guilty about that, being like, oh, I should be preparing, but yeah, you really do have to take care of yourself, and give yourself grace and permission to really just do whatever it takes to like yeah stay healthy and to kind of stay grounded. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anil, Tommy, and Claire, for making the time to share your experience with us today. It was very enlightening and helpful, so we really appreciate it. And thanks everybody